Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 14 team selection. I've got 2 free transfers and there's a high possibility that I use both of them. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, looking ahead to Game Week 14, if you want to see how badly Game Week 13 went for me, we already reviewed it in detail earlier on in the week, so I don't need to repeat that information, mainly because I have a bit of PTSD surrounding it. But let's move ahead to Game Week 14. I've got 2 free transfers, nothing in the bank. My team value has stacked up really nicely, and that is one of the benefits of the wildcard draft that I went for by obviously dropping Haaland. I got a lot of the other players that went up in price. So my team value is looking very healthy. It's just a shame the rank isn't looking as healthy alongside it. We'll start with the goalkeeper situation. I actually think that this is an okay fixture for Areola, just due to the injuries that Palace have. It's obviously at home too, but West Ham are really terrible. And more so than ever, I am very, very tempted either this week, depending on the transfer that I make, or in the coming weeks to make a goalkeeper transfer. And the main reason for that is I think there are now emerging 2 really, really decent options in Raya and Sanchez. Chelsea's fixtures look very good, and whilst they've struggled a bit in the last few defensively, they do have pretty good defensive data for the season. And Arsenal are the best defence in the league by some distance. Raya is pretty good for saves and bonus points too, as we've seen in previous seasons. So I really like the idea of getting either of them in. I probably do slightly prefer Raya, especially because I already have a Chelsea defender, even though he's not available for this week. So Raya is probably my slight favourite, but I think either of those are good options. And maybe if you've already got a Gabriel and or a Saliba or something like that, maybe you opt for Sanchez instead. But I think they could both serve you very well. Whether it will be Areola or Turner I sell will largely depend on the amount of money I have and whether I want to use the extra money to keep Areola as a potential rotation option. There's a chance that I just keep Turner and just move for the other goalkeeper instead. So goalkeepers are probably, I would say there's like a 20% chance I make a goalkeeper transfer this week. But if not, I don't have a massive issue with Areola at the moment, at least for this specific game week. Looking at the defence, it's okay, but there is a major omission in my defence. As we just spoke about, the Arsenal defence is unbelievably good, right? Saliba ticking along perfectly, pretty good for bonus points this season, carrying a little bit of attacking threat. Zinchenko has looked unbelievable recently. He is absolutely racking up bonus points. He's got decent attacking threat, around a 0.3 XGI in recent games. Gabriel, I think, is more now than people are giving him credit for too. I think White and Tomiyasu and the other players I'm a little bit more concerned about, but I think Gabriel and Saliba in particular feel like great players to own. And every time Arsenal keep a clean sheet now, my rank is getting battered. And I honestly think that will continue, especially in Game Week 14. They've got another really good fixture. So whilst I don't have an issue with my defenders, I'm looking at this and thinking there is a major issue, which is no Arsenal defence. The issue is, I don't see an obvious place to bring in an Arsenal defender. We'll discuss that as we go through. I'll start with Kieran Trippier, because I think this is the most obvious place to bring in an Arsenal defender. I still think Trippier is great, but there are a few issues. The fixtures over the next few aren't perfect, but then from 17 they do get a little bit better. But over the next few I could see only maybe 1 or 2 clean sheets maximum, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't keep any. They do still have quite a few injuries to some of their key players, and their squad is feeling very, very thin at the moment. He is very, very expensive too, so he not only needs to sort of match the likes of Saliba and Gabriel, but realistically outscore them by quite a bit to be worth the amount of money that he is, and he's on 4 yellow cards. So whilst I love Trippier, whilst I still think Newcastle are one of the better defences in the league, and whilst I would love to keep him, is he worth all of that extra money? It's about 1.5 million on top of Saliba. I'm less convinced now. So there is a chance that this week I do make the move of Trippier to Saliba, but I want to hold on to him, and I want to try and find another way to get to an Arsenal defender of some kind. People will just point at Reece James and go, Reece James is a troll. Reece James was a terrible transfer. Don't be stubborn. Move James to Saliba. Reverse that transfer. And you know what? That could well be the right play, but I brought in James for a reason. James getting sent off doesn't change the reason that I brought him in. I think Chelsea are a good defence. I think Reece James is incredibly attacking. And he's only suspended for 1 game because he picked up 2 yellows, not 1 sort of single red. So James will be back for Game Week 15 and beyond. And for that reason, I don't want to be selling Reece James. So I know people will suggest that. I want to keep him. I think he'll be an even better differential now, especially because no one's going to buy a player that's just been sent off. My only concern around James is in the first 2 games that he came back in the Prem, Reece James looked incredibly fit. In Game Week 13 against Newcastle, he struggled a little bit fitness-wise, as well as just obviously the sending off. So we'll have to assess it. Maybe it'll end up being a bad transfer. But for now, I'm okay having Reece James, and he's not going to be sold for me this week. The other 3 defenders, I've got Taylor in the starting 11. Sheffield United at home, it's the best fixture in the league. I wouldn't usually play Taylor, but I was actually quite impressed with Burnley in Game Week 13. I don't think they are a terrible defence. They're not the best defence, but they're not terrible. And more importantly, I think Sheffield United are pretty terrible. So I'm not necessarily expecting a clean sheet from Taylor here, but when I look at Taylor versus Gahey on the bench against West Ham away, I think I actually prefer Taylor. On Gahey, not a transfer I'll be making now to bring in him. I wouldn't be looking to bring in any Crystal Palace defenders due to Doucouré's injury. So I think Crystal Palace are probably a defence that we're looking to move out of very, very soon. On top of that, not having Eze for any period will affect the way that they progress the ball up the pitch, which will, of course, impact them defensively as well. So I'm a little bit worried about Palace. And, of course, the fixtures from sort of Game Week 15, 16 onwards start to turn for the worst. So Gahey, I'm happy having him as part of my team, maybe a 4th or 5th defender, but longer term, I think he will need to be replaced because there aren't going to be that many weeks that I want to play him. And then another potential issue, Tsimikas. I think Tsimikas is great when he plays. Liverpool have been okay defensively this season, great for bonus points, pretty attacking too. And the fixtures are really nice up until about Game Week 17. So I have no issues with having Tsimikas for now, but do I know that it will start every game? Absolutely not. And especially in 14, 15, and 16, we have 3 game weeks in the space of 1 actual week. There's no way Tsimikas plays all 3, and then trying to predict which ones he plays and which ones he doesn't will be very difficult. Of course, I'm recording this on Thursday morning. We'll have to see if he plays in Europe, and that will impact, of course, whether we think he's going to start in the Prem. But if I think there's any chance that he starts this week, I'm just going to start him and hope that he plays. So, I mean, the defence, to be honest, as I'm going through that, isn't great. Trippier is fine, but he's the most expensive, which makes him the most obvious route to an Arsenal defender. I think Reece James is fine too. Taylor is fine as a 5th defender. I think realistically, longer term, it is Tsimikas and Mark Gahey who are the players that I'll probably need to remove. And when I go through that, this is one of the reasons that I'm considering Areola to Raya, because I don't really want to remove Trippier or James, and I can't get Tsimikas, Taylor, or Gahey up to a Saliba. I could maybe try and get them to a Gabriel Zinchenko if I have the money, but maybe Areola to Raya is the slightly more sensible move, and it'll allow me to get into maybe slightly cheaper defenders for the rest of my team. So that's the way we're looking going into Game Week 14 for the defence. Not ideal, but also not terrible. Let's move on to midfield. So, taking a look at the midfield, I'm actually not too displeased with the midfield because I think if I was on a wild card, I would have 3 of these players anyway, and maybe even 4 if Bowen's fit. But the 3 that I would definitely be having is Salah, Son, Saka. I don't really need to talk about Salah in detail. He's an excellent asset. He will continue to be an excellent asset. Of course, he will go to AFCON from Game Week 21 onwards, so at that point, we'll need to sell him. He also has a pretty tricky fixture against Arsenal in Game Week 18. So if you were looking to sell Salah, you probably could do that around 17, 18 if you wanted to. But for me, I think I'm probably more likely to just hold him all the way to AFCON and then move him on after that. And then I'll probably bring him straight back in as well. Son and Saka, there have been doubts around both with myself and also other managers as well. Son, I've not really had too many doubts around. I think he'll continue to be a great asset, but I know a lot of people disagree with me, which is absolutely fine. This is what makes FPL such a fun game, is that everyone's got different opinions around which players are good and which players aren't. But I think he's still got absolutely everything you would want. He is an elite, and when I say elite, probably the best finisher in world football, and that's backed by the stats as well. So that feels like immediately a pretty good reason to have him. He's still getting the chances in the absence of Maddison. I'm not saying he's getting the same quantity, but we saw against Villa, yes, 3 of the goals were offside. I'm not really counting them because he was offside. He wouldn't have scored the goals if he wasn't offside. So I don't think you can be like, oh, I was really unlucky I didn't get those 3 offside goals because he was offside. But he's still making the correct runs. He's still getting the chances. And I still think they have enough creativity behind him to still get him enough chances to score goals. Will Spurs create the same amount and score the same amount in the absence of Maddison? No, but we don't need them to. We just need Son to continue to deliver. Even if Son gets 1 goal a game and Spurs lose every single game 4-1, that doesn't matter. Again, football and FPL are 2 different things. I just need Son to get 1 or 2 big chances per game, which I still think he could, and I think he will finish them if that's the case because he's such a great finisher. On top of that, Son is on penalties too, and I think sooner rather than later you would expect Spurs to get a penalty. I know penalties don't work in that way, but some other teams have had like 5 or 6 penalties. Spurs are still yet to get one. So I'm happy holding Son for the time being, but I do obviously need to move back to Erling Haaland in Game Week 16. And if he looks really poor in 14 and 15, Son, then there is a chance that I do sell him. So I'm not saying I'm going to hold him for forever, but at least for the next 1 or 2 game weeks, some will be staying for me. Saka, I've had a lot of concerns around Saka, and I receive a lot of stick for it in the comments. I want to start by saying I'm a Man United fan and I hate Arsenal, but I love Saka. It's impossible to dislike him. So people think I have an agenda against Saka. I own Saka. I adore him as a player. I think he's got an excellent temperament. I think he's one of the best right wingers in world football. However, what I do on this channel is I look into the data and I suggest you players that aren't getting enough big chances and aren't creating enough chances either. And Saka's data continues to underwhelm. And I know he's still getting points, but the data doesn't make me think that it's going to continue at a high rate. And he's not putting up great data in any single game. He's just ticking along with the odd assist here and there, which isn't an issue because other players aren't ticking along with the odd assist here and there. For example, Heung-min Son hasn't get any returns in the last few weeks. So Saka isn't an issue for me, but I guess it's not a subjective thing. I can't just sit here and go, Saka's a great footballer. Like, we know that. But when I present the data to you, I can't fudge the data. I'm just telling you that Saka has been a little bit underwhelming. And so have Arsenal. Arsenal defensively this year have been remarkable. But from an attacking perspective, they are struggling quite a lot. So Saka's not an issue in my team. I would still have him. But the fact that he's sharing penalties this year thus far, the fact that his data isn't great, and the fact that Arsenal as a team are struggling to create a lot of chances, it does make me wonder if he's as essential as he has been in previous years. However, Saka is amazing at home in comparison to away, so this feels like a very good fixture for him. And Arsenal put 6 goals past Lens in the Champions League too, and Saka did get a couple of returns there. So I don't think Saka's an issue, but I think if you don't own him, I don't think he's essential as someone like an MBEUMO at the moment. I'd probably rather go out and buy a Brian MBEUMO. I'm then left with Martinelli and Bowen. If Bowen's fit this week, and by fit I don't mean touch and go, I mean confirmed fit, I will keep Bowen. I think if there are any doubts, I'll sell him. I know it's a decent fixture, and I've just said that I think Palace will struggle defensively. I don't think I want to keep going in week to week having issues and worries about whether Jared Bowen will start or not. So I think if there are any doubts, I'll probably just sell him. The only thing is I do have a decent first sub in Alvarez. So if I just keep Bowen and Bowen doesn't play, well, then I get Alvarez off the bench. And I quite like that because I don't really want to bench Alvarez against Tottenham. So there's the possibility there that, yes, I should probably sell him, but I also might just keep him because it allows me to just play a decent player that I already have in Alvarez. Like, the player that I bring in for Bowen, are they going to be that much better than Alvarez against Tottenham at home? Maybe not. I'm then left with Martinelli. Really disappointed by this transfer because the data's been poor all season. So I went against my own rule, which is bringing in a player that has poor data, but it's because his historical data, i.e. how he's performed in previous seasons, especially last year. Martinelli is a great player, and he always gets such big chances, and I know he plays significantly worse with Nketiah, and he's much better alongside someone like Jesus or Trossard, but in the 2 games that I owned him, he had Trossard alongside him, and it was Trossard that was getting the returns, and Martinelli still looked pretty poor from an FPL perspective. He just wasn't getting enough chances to score goals. So, yeah, a little bit disappointed with the Martinelli transfer and not a player that I want to hold long term. So it's very, very likely that Martinelli is the one that makes way for me this week. And of course, Brian MBEUMO is the obvious player to bring in for Martinelli. So to kind of recap the midfield, Salah, Son, Saka likely to stay. They are going to stay, those 3. Martinelli and Bowen, I could sell one or I could sell both. I am going to be bringing in Brian MBEUMO this week. It's a very obvious transfer, but it's one that needs to happen, I think, for Luton at home. And also the 3 fixtures that MBEUMO has across 14, 15, 16. He just feels like a player that I desperately want in my team. And I'll probably keep in my team right up until AFCON. Or right up until I would probably keep him through blank game week 18, yeah, and then right up until AFCON. And I'll probably even own him post AFCON as well. So I guess I just need to decide, do I take out... Let's say that Bowen isn't fit. Do I keep Bowen and remove Martinelli still to bring in MBEUMO and then play Alvarez? Do I remove both Martinelli and Bowen? Because I could bring in MBEUMO and Palmer or MBEUMO and Gordon, right? I don't have to just remove one. I've got 2 free transfers. I could move out both. But again, I will bring you back to the fact that I don't currently own an Arsenal defender. So if I take out one midfielder with the other free transfer, I should probably try to bring in an Arsenal defender. So these are some of the things that I'm thinking about. But I think both Martinelli and Bowen pose issues. Bowen due to fitness, Martinelli due to the fact that Arsenal aren't attacking well and his data has been pretty poor. I will discuss in the final section some of the possible transfer combinations, which I'll of course confirm on my Saturday deadline stream. But that's the midfield. Let's move on to the forwards. So the forward situation is actually very, very interesting for me because I've got 3 of them. And I'll need to sell 2 of them to get back to Haaland. And the reason for that is I want to stay in a 3-5-2. So I'm going to have to sell one to go down to a cheap player. And then obviously one of the other forwards will then need to become Haaland. So by game week 16, two of Darwin, Watkins and Alvarez need to be sold for me. And I have got no idea. I have genuinely gone back and forth on keeping all of them. I think Watkins is the most safe option. He's the most reliable option. He's the one that will get the most minutes on a long-term basis. And going into the busy Christmas period, he is the one that is going to play the most. And of course, he has the best fixture in game week 18. Darwin has Arsenal and Alvarez doesn't play. So if I'm not free hitting an 18, Watkins feels like the best option to cover me in game week 18. So I love a lot about Watkins. But I would also argue he's got the most difficult fixtures from now until sort of game week 19, 20. And I would also say that he's got maybe one of the lower ceilings as well. I know he's got some of those big hauls, but he doesn't finish a lot of these big chances. And his data is okay, but not necessarily amazing. So I think Watkins is fine as a steady option. And I think he's probably the safest option to keep. But there are some concerns. And also on top of that, Watkins is the most expensive of the three. So when I'm looking at routes back to Haaland, Watkins being very, very expensive makes it a lot easier for me to move to Haaland if I sell him. So, I mean, in most of my combinations of transfers, Watkins has been the one that's sold. And it does move me towards a free hit in game week 18, purely just because I then don't have any Villa players. I've only got one Newcastle player. So my team's not looking ideal for blank game week 18. So Watkins, I'm fine for this week, but I'm talking about longer term here. Maybe a player that might be looking to be sold. Alvarez, based on how he's been performing, he should be sold, really. I mean, I'm actually slightly worried he's going to be more of a rotation risk now. He was looking like he was going to be benched in game week 13, but there was obviously the late illness to Grealish, I think. So it meant that Alvarez played, but he dropped another stinker. And even from a footballing perspective recently, a lot of Man City fans have been calling for Alvarez to be dropped or at least rotated a little bit. He obviously put in a decent performance off the bench in the Champions League, but yeah, I am not concerned about Alvarez, but he's been very, very underwhelming. And I do wonder if I'm going to bring in Haaland anyway. I have a City attacker. Do I need to keep Alvarez? But also, they have a potential double game week in 20. They have really nice fixtures in and around that as well. And having another City attacker may be a benefit that other teams don't have. So again, in a lot of combinations, I have sold Alvarez, but also due to him being the cheapest option and having good fixtures, I've kept him in quite a few too. And then that brings me on to Darwin. I love Darwin as a player. I think he's fantastic. I love the fact that his data is excellent. I love how many big chances he gets. And also now there is an injury to Jota. I don't think that massively impacts Darwin's minutes because most of the time it's Darwin versus Gakpo as the forward, and then it's Diaz versus Jota on the left. So I think Jota being injured makes Diaz a better option, and he could be a potential option in the midfield. But when I look at this, I don't think I think it will impact his minutes with respect to how early he gets subbed off, because there is one less attacker now to come off the bench. So it may be that in some games Diaz comes off, Darwin switches to the left and Gakpo's through the middle. So basically, to recap that, I didn't make much sense there. I don't think Jota being injured will impact Darwin's starts too often, but I think it will impact how many minutes he stays on the pitch for, which is a major benefit for him. This week, I've considered captain. Depending on these minutes, and I'm serious here because I think it's a really, really nice fixture for him. Based on how many minutes he gets in Europe, I will definitely consider it. I'll probably still default to Salah because of penalties, but I think Darwin has looked really good recently. I think his finishing this season has actually been okay. I know he's missed some big chances, but in general, he's still performing around what you would expect for his expected data. And he's a player that I kind of want to hold on to longer term, but the issue with Darwin is 14, 15, 16, again, are in the space of a week. And then after that, we get into the Christmas period where, again, we have at least another 1 or 2 midweek deadlines. And with all of these fixtures coming thick and fast, I just don't know how many of them Darwin's going to start. But he is their favoured number 9. He can do damage off the bench. He's great when he starts. I kind of want to hold on to him. But I guess for Game Week 14, I'm talking about the future really here. For Game Week 14, Darwin, Watkins, Alvarez, I don't need to sell any of them. They're all absolutely fine. I'd be happy playing any of the 3. I don't love the idea of benching Alvarez, but based on his recent performances and based on the other players that I have in my team, obviously Martinelli you would probably prefer to play Alvarez, but I'll probably sell him anyway. Bowen, I'd probably start ahead of Alvarez if he's fit. So I don't really see any obvious players to bench in order to play Alvarez. So this is the team for now, currently rated at 90% according to Fantasy Football Hub, predicted to get 63.8 points. 2 free transfers. Let's now move on to looking at my watch list, the players that I want to bring in for Game Week 14. And in the final section, I'll show you some of my possible transfer combinations and what my team might look like going into the deadline. So very briefly, here is the list of players that I want to own going into Game Week 14 in an ideal world. And to be perfectly honest, it's pretty simple. Arsenal defence, Brian MBEUMO and Erling Haaland. Like, if I could pick my team from scratch now, those are the major things that I would be changing. So it's about prioritising those. I do think Haaland is an excellent player for this game week, but I can't get there this week for anything less than a -8. So I can't bring in Haaland this week. As much as I think he's a great option, I think he will do very well, and I think he's fine as a captaincy. Prioritising him this week doesn't make sense. I'll still probably do it in 16, looking like it could be for free at the most a -4. So Haaland's out of the equation this week, again, as much as I would like to own him, which then means that it's Arsenal defence and Brian MBEUMO, but also you can see on it, I do like Palmer, I like Gordon, and I like some of the other players like Gibbs White Hwang as well. So I really do need to decide which moves I make this week and how I prioritise that. So if we just go over to kind of the official site and show you what my team looks like, this is more like a live stream, I suppose, in this section. I do apologise, by the way, there's building works outside, so if you can hear drilling and knocking, I do really apologise. Hopefully the mic isn't picking that up. But Bowen being out would mean that I would bring Brian MBEUMO in for Bowen, right? So that would be a relatively straightforward transfer if he's confirmed out. But if he's touch and go, as I said, I've got Alvarez on the bench anyway, and I think Martinelli is just as big of an issue because he just doesn't look great at the moment. And whilst he is better at home, and whilst I quite like the Wolves at home fixture, I'm almost just keeping him based on fixtures and historical performances when he is not looking great. I know he got 2 or 3 attacking returns against Lens, but that doesn't suddenly make Martinelli a great option in the Prem. So I think Martinelli out and Brian MBEUMO in feels like a pretty good transfer. That leaves me at the moment 0.7, but Brian MBEUMO may be changing a price tonight, so I might need to make a move soon, because if I want to do the David Raya replacement, if I take out Areola and go for David Raya, I should say, then I have 0 in the bank. I would love David Raya in my team, but if I don't make the move tonight and I get priced out, then I unfortunately won't be able to do that. I could then move for Sanchez, and whilst I think Sanchez is a great option, I think the priority at the moment needs to be Arsenal defence. So my other couple of options is selling Trippier for Saliba, which would give me a lot of money in the bank and would start to make it a lot easier for me to move back to Erling Haaland. That would give me 2.1 mil in the bank, so I'd be in a really, really strong position. Or the other possibility is actually, because of these fixtures coming up and because of the fact that Palace are just, I think they're struggling with injuries. West Ham, Bournemouth is okay in 15, but then Liverpool, City, Brighton, Chelsea, like, it's just not a nice run of fixtures. I could do Mark Gahey to either Zinchenko or Gabriel. I think Zinchenko, when he plays, is a much better option than Gabriel. I think he's been so attacking. He's good for bonus points as well. But going into the busier period, I think both will be rotated. But I worry about Zinchenko's minutes more than I do Gabriel. So I know some people are wanting to maybe sell him because they're worried about his minutes. But I think that's being overplayed slightly. I am thinking that Gabriel would still be a decent option. So they're kind of some of the possibilities. The other thing is maybe I want to sell Martinelli and Bowen's out and I don't want to play Alvarez. Maybe I do just skip the Arsenal defence for 1 or 2 more weeks, which doesn't feel overly wise, but maybe I just don't make a defensive transfer and I actually take out Bowen and Martinelli. And if that's the case, I don't know why my site keeps glitching out, then it would probably be Palmer. It could be Gordon. I also still like Gibbs White as an option too, but that would then give me still 2.8 million. And again, it would move me closer to getting Erling Haaland in Game Week 16. So I think Brian MBEUMO in for either Martinelli or Bowen feels fairly obvious. And then outside of that is, do I want to make another midfield transfer? Do I want to bring in a Gabriel for Gahey? Do I want to bring Saliba for Trippier? Do I want to bring in Raya for Areola? Or do I potentially want to roll the transfer going into Game Week 15? And then that will allow me, again, a much easier route. It'll probably allow me to not take the hit to bring in Haaland, or at least make it a lot easier to bring him back in. And maybe I just keep it simple with MBEUMO in this week. Because realistically, yes, Arsenal defence are great. But my defence does look fine for this week. And if Bowen doesn't feature and I take out Martinelli instead, well, then I still have Alvarez off the bench. So I'd love to know what you think about those multiple different transfer combinations down below. Brian MBEUMO in feels fairly comfortable for me at the moment. The final thing I just wanted to look at was my AI recommended transfers from Fantasy Football Hub. Most weeks they tell me to try and buy Haaland, but actually this week they don't, because obviously I have the possible injury to Bowen. And they actually say Bowen to Gordon is the transfer that they'd make. And I don't actually dislike this at all. I think Gordon does look pretty decent for the next 5 or 6 game weeks. He obviously has a nice fixture in blank Game Week 18. The data isn't great, but he is still performing and his goal threat is decent enough. So Bowen to Gordon, yeah, if you were telling me you were going to make that move, I don't hate that at all. Another potential option, as you can see here, is to sell Reece James because he's suspended this week, so his points projections is going to be quite low, and then bring in Gabriel instead. But I think longer term, I think James versus Gabriel is quite close. Gabriel playing for the better defense, but James obviously more attacking. So there's some of the AI recommended transfers. If you do want to get 30-day free trial and 30% off, they're still doing the Black Friday 30-day free trial over at Fantasy Football Hub. Might as well give it a go. If you don't like the site, then you, of course, don't have to continue with your membership. But if you do, then you can obviously continue, and hopefully it will help you to get the best possible rank and win your mini leagues. So there will be a link down below if you want to get that deal. I do appreciate it. Obviously, I'll get a little kickback, but I think Fantasy Football Hub is amazing too. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 14 team selection. Hopefully you did enjoy today's video. And if you did, please do smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well. Let me know what you think down below of my transfer plans, and let me know what you are planning for Game Week 14 too. And until next time, which will be my deadline decisions video tomorrow, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.